So today we're joined by a very special guest, Josh Stuart, who is an experienced mountain guide based right here in Seattle. Josh is not only an accomplished guide with years of experience leading clients on mountaineering and outdoor objectives, but he's also a seasoned climber who's climbed in the Alps, summited the Eiger, summited 50-some of the 100 Bulgers in Washington, and a ton of other things. In this podcast, we're going to be getting into the challenges he faces as a guide, how to prepare for a specific mountaineering objective, the most common mistake beginner mountaineers make, and so much more. If you're new to mountaineering and climbing, you're absolutely going to love this podcast. Josh is basically going to be your mentor for this whole thing. And now, I apologize in advance for my audio on this. It doesn't sound too bad, but I'm really working to try and make this really good for you guys. I think what I'm just gonna do is get a really good shotgun mic that I can plug directly into my good camera. Regardless, I think, my guest's audio is better than mine, which is like, what the heck? I'm the podcast host. So yeah, the intro got cut off because I had to switch webcams on the fly, and it's almost like I have to prioritize either having a good webcam or good audio. And I thought I was prioritizing audio at this time, but it was a little bit subpar. So I'm still working on it. Thank you for being patient with me, and let's get into the podcast. So today we're going to be kind of talking all about kind of guiding. And matter of fact, the way we met was actually getting guided. Josh was actually teaching us how to do crevasse rescue is how it went. Mm-hmm. And Josh, do you remember anything about that?
Yeah. You know what? I do remember that. And it was actually a pretty unique crevasse rescue course. And it's because you guys, I think it was September that you guys wanted to do your crevasse rescue course. And there was no snow left in Snoqualmie Pass. And so I did a little bit of networking around the guiding community to find that. And somebody on our team had a picture on their phone from climbing a nearby peak that happened to have a picture of Snow Lake in it. And if you zoomed in really far, like 10x, you could see this little patch of snow at the north end of Snow Lake. And, just having some familiarity with the scale, we figured that was probably like a 40, 50-foot snow cliff that dropped into the lake. And I think it was, like 2 hours of hiking just to get in there. But we got in there, and sure enough, they had a nice snow cliff to use as the crevasse edge. It's pretty sweet.
We had like a 2-hour approach. What did you wear to the 2-hour approach for shoes?
Oh yeah, that's right. I think I just forgot my trail running shoes, so I brought Crocs. Yeah, that's right.
This is how I knew Josh was the real deal. By the way, this like approach was, for a regular person, like this would have been like a difficult hike, I think. We were doing off-trail stuff. I remember coming back from that thing, and we're slipping and sliding, trying to get through the brush and stuff, and it was...
No, it was some off-trail travel, yeah. It's all relative, it's all relative.
Yeah. No, it was really cool, yeah. So we did our crevasse rescue training over avalanche debris field, and it was... Do you remember the first screw-up that you saw us have? How could you forget this?
Oh yeah, you guys brought micro traction spikes, not crampons. I think that was one of the things I remember.
Yeah. We brought trail runners. Yeah, we brought trail runners. Yeah, I think we brought universal crampons though. But it was like we put crampons on
trail runners.
And we were like, what were we doing? So, but anyway, man, that was how we met, and Josh pretty much blew my mind that day of like all the things that I didn't know. So yeah, so I would love to just pick your brain about being a guide. So I have a series of questions, and we'll kind of see where we're going with that. But
sure, but before you get into that, the first thing that comes to mind when you're saying all that, you're like, this is the most experienced guy I've ever had on the show, and blah 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 and all this stuff. But it's all relative. Like, I feel a little bit of imposter syndrome sometimes, and I think that's relevant to share with everybody who's watching, because I'm sure everyone feels that a little bit. Because what do I do on a regular basis? I hang out with a whole bunch of other guides. I go train with a bunch of other guides, and so relative to them, I just feel like the little baby in the room. So it's all relative,
Yeah. Well, we need to, to me, but and then like to me, it's like this dude's like a black belt in mountaineering. especially like when we went down to Sahali and stuff like that. That was like the last big adventure of the year for me.
Yeah, that was
and
cool.
I'm not gonna lie, man. So Sahali is a bulger, and Josh, you have done it. You've done it before, right? I think. Yeah. And so you get up to the top, and you got a big wrap down, couple rappels down, and I was like, "Dang, man!" But like I was all jacked up, ready to do it. But I'm so glad you came with us on that trip because you were very helpful. Like way more. I feel more confident with people that I trust, is what I'm saying. Type of thing like that. And so I think that's like one of the things. Like, so as a guide, how do you go about, what are the challenges you face? Like, what are the biggest challenges you face as a guide leading people that you don't know into the mountains, kind of doing something that maybe people would consider as risky? What are some of the big challenges with that, do you think?
So specific to people I don't know, the biggest challenge is knowing what they're capable of and knowing how long things are going to take. And the way you mitigate the risk of that becoming a problem is we'll do like a shakedown. I'm not going to go do a super challenging objective that has a really long approach and hard climbing and big days with someone I haven't climbed with before. So I might take them on, a half-day trip that involves just like a little bit of alpine scrambling, a little bit of exposure before I take them on a big, long alpine objective. And so what could become a big challenge on a big day, we just don't even let it get there because we won't take somebody new on a big thing like that without having done that. Now, that being said, in my own personal climbing, it's totally different. I've taken a friend who his first time alpine climbing, we did a Liberty Bell Traverse, which was a 20 pitch day, 5 different peaks, and it took us like 18 hours to do it. Wow. So it's just like that's getting a little crazy, but I would never do that with a client. It's very much more conservative.
Yeah, right on. Was that the guy we went to Sahali with, that you did that with?
No, but that's the kind of guy that we've done similar adventures together. Me and Svet have done similar adventures together where we're just, having a good old suffer fest. I lost you.
Oh, there we go. Good. So you and Svet have had similar adventures to that.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like kind of the how do you, like, it's got to be hard for you as a guide right now to, like, is it tough as a guide right now to find people like kind of at your level of like what you want to do and the things that you're interested in? How do you, and like when you do try to find those types of people, how do you vet them out to be like a good partner? Like what are you looking for in like a good, like, I guess, climbing partner, mountain partner, things like that?
Oh, you just mean like for recreational climbing, on my free time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the important thing is we have like similar objectives. Like there are some climbers out there that, they climb really hard and they'd be a good partner if I wanted to climb something that's really, really hard. There's partners out there that are specific to the objective. So like if I want to do an ice climbing objective that, I'm going to have to find somebody who's good at ice climbing. But I think for me, like right now, what's important to me is when I have days off, I want to go see terrain that I've never seen before. And I've seen most of the short approach, closer to the road type wilderness areas in Washington. And so the only things that are left are really, really remote areas that are going to require putting in a ton of miles. I work a full-time regular job. I don't just guide. Guiding is just a weekend job for me. And so I've got limited amount of time. And so being able to pack away a lot of miles, and we're talking like, 50 miles in a weekend, is the kind of partner that I'm looking for, because those are the objectives that I want to do.
Got it. So they almost have to have, they got to be pretty well rounded, but they really need to have a lot of that endurance piece to like kind of put up with the suck and like the type 2 fun that goes along with a lot of this stuff. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yep, got to have a good attitude about it for sure.
Would you say that attitude is one of the most common things people overlook when they're looking for partners, or they're just by themselves on like going for a mountaineering objective? Do you think like that's one of the things that could kind of make or break things?
Yeah, it's definitely something that would make or break. I don't know that I would highlight that as being something that often gets overlooked. But it is a very important thing to have a good attitude.
Yeah. I've been on trips where people that have a bad attitude brings down the whole, I mean, it just brings down the whole vibe.
Oh yeah.
And that's tough. I mean, cause like you already know you're out there to suffer. Like that's already kind of like an unwritten code. Like you're probably going to suffer at some point. And so when somebody's complaining about the suffering, it kind of just doesn't make it as fun. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't like suffering, then you shouldn't even get into mountaineering. You gotta be down for a little bit of that. I mean, there's a lot of reward, obviously, you know, that the ROI is really, really high, but you also gotta understand that you're going to be suffering some.
Why do you think people are able to put up with that suffering in return for the reward?
Why do we think we're able to put up with it? This is off the script, man. I didn't like pre-contemplate this question, so I'm gonna have to think about that for a second.
Yeah, I think that is a hard question. But I think, I think that people always have to have some type of purpose. It's something that they're going after. I think mountaineering is like the quintessential, like you get to this peak, like you're going, like you're working hard to this peak and like you finally get to the summit. And it's like how a lot of people talk about hitting goals and things like that, but that's like actually what we're doing.
Yeah, it's funny. This could easily turn into like a philosophical side trail that we could spend an hour on just that topic alone. It's actually something I've been meaning to talk to you about on just having just quit your job and doing all that stuff and trying to figure out how you're going to make the outdoor thing work for you.
Yeah.
But without getting too deep into it, I think mountaineering is a little microcosm for everyday life. You get to this objective that you've been building towards over and over and over again. Then once you get to the top, you realize, well, now what? What's the next thing? There's always going to be a next thing. And you have this expectation that once you get to that objective, then you'll be happy. Once you get that house, then you'll be happy. Once you graduate from college, then you'll be happy. I think a really good analogy is like coming back from a trailhead. You're walking back to the trail and you've been out for 4 days and your feet hurt and your back hurt and you just can't think about anything but getting to the trailhead and getting to the car. And then once you get to that car, you're like, oh gosh, that's the best looking Prius I've ever seen. You could kiss it. And then you get back, and then what's the next thing you're thinking about, right? For the next half an hour, you're driving back into town, and you got your boots off, and everything feels great, but now you're thinking about a burger and a beer back in town. And then you get that burger, and by that point, it's 11 o'clock at night, and you got a 3-hour drive back home, and the only thing you can think about for the next 3 hours is your shower and your bed, right? So it's just like throughout that entire day, what's happened? You weren't present for one moment of that day because you were constantly thinking about what's happening next and what's happening next. And so that's kind of one of the great things about what I found a lot of people love about climbing is that when you're doing that technical stuff, when you're engaged in rock climbing or ice climbing or something that's objective, you're forced to be present. You don't have to work at it. You don't have to meditate to be present. You're forced to. You can't be thinking about, a report that's due at work on Monday when you're rock climbing, So it forces presence, but it's on those down times when you're suffering and you are wishing you were somewhere else that it becomes really challenging. And that's where you just got to be where you are. And that's kind of that's my takeaway.
I think we talked about that at Sahali once too. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great point because there is nothing else you can really think about when you're on the wall climbing a technical route.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you nailed that. But like when you're backpacking you're going to the approach, it's like you could be swimming in ideas. Yeah.
And there's flies and mosquitoes and all of this stuff. And you're just you don't want to be there in that mountain. And that's when it's really challenging.
Do you ever get where when you get home after an extended trip, that you, at least for a couple weeks, at least for a week for sure, like I feel more grateful for the stuff that I have around me, a bed. I don't have to filter my water and all like this stuff. And for me, sometimes I feel like that is a reason why I go and do these extended trips, because I come back and then I start to be way more grateful than I ever was before.
Hmm. Yeah, more recently I have. I remember when I was younger, as a teenager, and every single trip we would literally be planning the next trip on the drive back home, because this was like one right after another.
Yeah, yeah, and that can get into a tireless loop, unfortunately. But yeah, well, let's get back on script here.
Yeah, let's get back into it.
So we did kind of discuss we talked about attitude, right? What else do you think are common things that people overlook when they are prepping, or when they're just doing a mountaineering objective? Mm-hmm. Let's say two different ones. So you have like a Mount Rainier, like a slog type one versus, and then maybe like an Alpine one that we would be going on later this
mm-hmm.
year.
Sure. Yeah. So, generally, I think the thing that comes to mind that gets often overlooked is gear. People always bring way too much stuff that they don't really need, and they aren't really well versed at how to pack it yet. And so it ends up becoming this overstuffed giant 80-liter backpack with a bunch of things on the outside flopping around, and it's a yard sale. It's just kind of a junk show, but it's also a lot of weight. And that bogs down you, and that adds up over the day, and you get more and more tired. And then every time you need something out of that pack, you got to rifle through everything to get to it. So it's kind of like, if you went on vacation and had this giant overstuffed suitcase, and you got to get to a t-shirt, but in order to get to that t-shirt, you have to unpack every single thing in your bag to get to it. And when you have to do that every time you need something, it's just like, it hurts the experience. So it's the same thing. So really figure out what you need and why you're bringing every single thing in your pack. Like, know why you're bringing it, and really analyze and be kind of brutal on it. Like, do I really need to bring this? Because it's not adding to the experience.
So kind of be as minimal as you can is what
mm-hmm.
you're saying.
Yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
100% agree. What would you say to this question? Because this is what I always get. Well, I would rather be safe than sorry. So I'd rather bring this, that, and the other thing, and a full med kit, and this and that, and you know what I'm saying? 3 different coats in case one gets dunked in the water.
Yeah.
What would you say to people with that?
Well, then, you better bring literally like the kitchen sink with you then, because I think it's really just kind of it's an excuse to not analyze what you're doing and ask why. It's an excuse to not really think about what you're doing. There's a lot of things that can be prepped for. There's a lot of things that can be planned for. There's a lot of things that you can use a process of elimination to determine whether or not you're going to need that, right? If you're in the middle of July and the forecast is totally stable with no precipitation for the next week, do I really need to bring a rain jacket? No, because it is not going to rain, right? Mm-hmm. So you protect against things that, you try to prevent things that are likely from happening, and you try to mitigate things that could happen by bringing gear with you.
I love that. Yeah. So protect against things that so if you're going into so you bring a rain jacket if you're going end of September in the PNW, most likely, because it could be a 50-50 toss-up. And a lot of times when there's a 40% chance of rain, it rains.
Yes, 30%. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But you're totally right. Like, knowing the climate, researching that stuff, see the extended weather, checking the weather before. Mm-hmm. What do I absolutely need to have versus what can I get by with, Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love it. Mm-hmm. What about then? So what about then, like, the Alpine thing that we're going to be doing, we're going to be doing like Grand Teton, Gannett Peak, that type of stuff, Circuit of the Tower. So a little more technical. Mm-hmm. Is it kind of the same thing where bring only what you kind of need, or what else? What's something that someone might overlook, like me, going into that being maybe a first timer, kind of a rookie going into that situation?
So the concept is the same. I mean, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. The only time that I'm bringing a bunch of stuff that I probably don't need is if I'm like car camping, because it doesn't matter, right? I'm not carrying those ounces.
Right.
So it's the same. Doesn't matter where. If I'm carrying it on my back, I'm going to bring only what I know that that's appropriate to bring. I'm not going to say need, because there's things that I really hope that I don't need that I bring. An SOS beacon in case I need to be rescued. Right. I bring a first aid kit, even though I'm probably not going to get hurt.
Right.
But the things that have it's basically the same thing with bringing gear as it is when making a risk assessment in the mountains, right? You have a likelihood versus consequences. And if I have, a high likelihood but low consequences, then that's not maybe a problem. Or if I have a low likelihood but high consequence, maybe that's not a problem. But if you get into like a medium of both of those, or high of both of those, if that number gets to where I usually put that scale on I usually put each one of those on a scale of 1 to 5, and then add them together. And if I get into 6, so 3 on each scale, then you got to change your decision. So it's the same thing with gear. What's the likelihood of you needing something versus what's the consequences of not having it?
I love that. So it's almost, so you have to have one or the other. Yeah. So you're ranking it on like an actual, it's almost like a little, so if you need it, so you're looking at it as, okay, if the consequence is high, but I probably won't run into that, I probably am not going to bring it.
Mm-hmm.
Thing. But if
you're
in the middle of that,
mm-hmm.
if it meets in the middle of that, where pretty good, pretty high consequences and pretty high likelihood that it's going to happen, I'm going to bring that type of gear. And that's going to, that's something that would be appropriate for that adventure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really good tip for everybody listening. What are the, what is that called? Is that actually, like, I feel like I've read that somewhere too, where I actually think it was in the Avalanche book that I have, something about,
I'm sure there's a risk assessment tool in the Avalanche. I'm not sure if it uses that exact scale, but it's going to be something similar. It's weighing your likelihood versus consequences and kind of adding them together.
I love it. Cool. Perfect. So as being a mountain guide, what are some significant things someone wouldn't know about a mountain guide, but is extremely important to you as the guide?
I think that the meditative process for me, kind of like we talked about earlier, that's what's most important. Spend a lot of time trying to be present in the mountains, right? Because you can't, we've all both had tons of experiences in the mountains over the years, right? And they were all awesome, but we can't relive them, right? And we got tons of plans. You and I got some plans to climb this summer, and I got a whole bunch of plans to do a bunch of other stuff in the coming years, but we're not guaranteed those, right? The only moment we have is what's right in front of us. So, and that wasn't always the case. I didn't always have that mindset, but lately that's become like the most important thing is when I'm there, I'm present. And sometimes that can be challenging because maybe, when I'm guiding, I'm doing a lot of things that I've done over and over and over. So it's not so much, there's not really any novelty there. It's nothing new. So it makes it even more important to just be present with what's in front of you.
Okay, that was going to be my follow-up question, because that was a really good point. So as a mountain guide, you're doing routes that you've done a dozen times or something or so before. And so one of the things that you're kind of implying is that now you're actually really taking the time to challenge yourself to be present in that experience. Yeah. What do you think it has came from? Do you think that place or that mindset has came as you are, not that you're old, but you're getting, as we start aging a little bit, we're getting older. Do you think it's a mix of that with the guiding that you got it from? Or what was kind of like the breakthrough with that for you? Because it wasn't until we were on Sahale and we were chilling in the sun there right after the glacier coming down, when you were kind of talking about that, and we just kind of chilled out for like half hour, 45 minutes, like just in the sun. And it was awesome. Me by myself, I probably would have never done that. I would just, I'm going to the car, right? What was like the breakthrough for you with that?
That's a big that's a big question. I'll answer it pretty short, briefly this time, but that's a big question. Um, to the kind of the first part of your question, I'd say yes, it is definitely due to how getting older and more experience, because I think you need to experience a series of things in your life firsthand of working toward a goal and then accomplishing that goal and then having that feeling of what's next. And you need to do that several times throughout your life before you realize that there's always going to be a what's next, and that you're never going to just be happy when you get there. You're never going to be, because happiness isn't tied to that objective, right? It's completely independent. So that's that first question. And then the second part of it, I think you asked if there was some sort of like breakthrough moment. And there actually was. In 2019, my wife and I were on our way to New Zealand, and we had a layover in Hawaii, and we're laying on the beach there, and Adam Sandler's filming a movie just like right in view across the beach at a hotel, and we're hanging out in the sun, and we're in paradise, right? Well, up into that trip, I'd been training for an ice climbing course, and I'd been trying to get a bunch of climbing in so I could get strong and so I'd be ready for the course. And it just wasn't cold enough in Washington, so I just didn't get like hardly any climbing in. So we're laying on the beach and all this is happening, and I'm like scrolling on Instagram, and I see that it's like getting cold, and I'm seeing all these things posted on these ice climbing pages, and I'm like, God damn it, like I'm missing it. I'm missing all the ice climbing opportunity. And my wife looks over at me and she's like, dude, what's wrong with you? What the hell is wrong with you? You're in paradise, you're in Hawaii, and you're off somewhere else. And that I was just like, it really hit me. And I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. What's going on? What is this?
Yeah. So you were in paradise, in the sun, the nice sun, and now, and somewhere that people would kill to get to, especially when you're in Washington for the winter and you don't have any sun, right? And but your mind was somewhere else. Yeah.
Well, and this is a really unique time. Like our generation is really kind of in a unique point having to deal with this, because we experienced the world pre-social media, and now we're experiencing it with social media, but it hasn't been around long enough for us to know as a society how much of an impact it's going to make on us. And so that's one of those points where we're realizing that sort of impact that it is making on us. And so we just got to be careful with how we allow it to participate in our lives.
Yeah, really good points. And I have gone through, I haven't had the breakthrough that you had, because that was profound and something that I am wanting to get more of. I really resonate with the fact that there's always another thing. I was just talking to my fiance 3 hours before here, and I was talking about her, how I was like, I don't feel like I have like a goal this year, like a big goal, because I don't know where I'm going to be at and when I'm going to be. And after my 100-miler, I was like depressed for like weeks, because that was like the pit. I'm like, what am I supposed to do now? Like, I'm not going to do any more running probably. I don't want to do 200. Like that's just way too much running and way too much time. But like, what is my new goal? And I struggle with that for a long time, because usually, like you were saying, I would already have another goal lined up in the back of my mind as I'm doing the activity. Yeah. But the 100 required so much that I was just like, oh, I'm going to be, but no, totally. It's not until now that I'm starting to like reap the benefits of the 100, like 4 or 5 months later, which is really weird. And then to your point about social media, I actually have, so I still will follow people, but there's people that I will not watch their stories.
Yep.
I can only watch their stories if I have had a good weekend. Like, as in, like, I was already outside doing shit, like banging stuff out. If not, if I was at home doing work, and I can't look at their stories. Yeah. Do you ever feel like that?
Oh yeah. I understand. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I definitely have had many moments before that breakthrough moment, and some afterwards, but not as much, of just never ever feeling good enough. like always seeing everyone else's highlight reel, comparing my life to their life, and just no matter what I did, never good enough. Because everyone's, if you collectively, somebody is always on vacation, right? Always. And by comparison, it can make you feel like your life is, dull and boring. But everyone's probably doing that. They're probably looking at your feed and they're thinking the exact same thing about you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
But we should just do a podcast on this topic, honestly.
Yeah. Well,
some
Josh
other time.
and I have talked about doing our, what did you call it? The Monday something.
The Monday Mountain Guide podcast or something.
Yeah.
Mountain Guide Mondays. There you go.
Yeah. That's what it was. It was going to be an exclusive segment. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So that we might have to shelf that, actually. Social media and the outdoors, coming from an outdoor content creator.
Yeah. Mental health. Yeah, exactly. No, the irony there is awesome. I love it.
Yeah. Right. I don't feel like I necessarily I don't post to make people feel bad, though. I feel like most of my stuff is trying to make people laugh or educated. Yeah. But if I am doing an adventure, I'll post that or whatever. But to me, it's almost I have to have a little bit of credibility, what shit I'm doing, But yeah, there's, what's funny is it's not to keep going down this, but the term FOMO, and FOMO has always been, I was just FOMO is when people are going partying or whatever. No, FOMO, there's an outdoor FOMO, 100%. Yeah. And
for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, all right, back to some guide stuff. On these trails. Boy, now we have new topics.
Exactly. Write them down.
Yeah, I am. All right. So, okay. I kind of got into this a little bit, but I want to get into it a little bit more. So, biggest challenges you face as a guide, and how do you approach these challenges to ensure the safety and satisfactions of your clients? So, when you are actually, I'm more interested in when you are on the trip with 4 or 5 people, whoever you're guiding, what are some of the most common and the biggest challenges you as a guide encounter? Is it having to deal with people that are arguing, that in the group they don't know each other, or wife and, I think you told us, there was a story once where people, you almost have to be the referee. You have to be, you are the person that is, I don't know, you're the guide. So how do you deal with that type of stuff?
Yeah. So, I had something completely different in mind when you first asked this question, and I'll have to circle back to that. But as you kind of elaborated on that, some other things did come to mind. And yes, I don't very often have clients that are challenging. There is one who came to mind who just refused to do what I was telling her to do. And what I was telling her to do was standard practice in the industry for safety. It was doing an extended rappel. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, you attach your tether to your harness and you attach it away from your belay device. That way you can put a backup on it with a friction hitch, and that friction hitch won't get sucked up into the belay device and defeat the backup. So you extend it to create that separation. But yeah, she was arguing with me about that, and that's a safety thing, right? If there's a dispute that has to do with safety, they're just going to do it. And I'm not going to be. You're trying to be polite, but I'm not going to be polite about it. It's going to happen. They're going to do it, sure. And it's just there's no negotiating about it. You're just going to do it. But if it's something like whether or not we're going to go to the summit, or if we're going to stay here and learn skills, I usually kind of use the group to do that. I allow to do that by consensus, and it's because there's no safety involved. If it isn't a safety measure, has nothing to do with that. Then I'll let the group decide, and it's just majority rules.
Interesting. So, interesting. Okay. So barring any kind of conditions or bad weather or something like that, you're just hey, you guys talk it over. And so I think what people don't know is a lot of times, you can get paired up with people that you don't know.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting thing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's gotta be very interesting. So now it's almost like a like freaking The Amazing Race or some kind of, some kind of reality challenge. Like,
Yep.
man, there's the next thing, reality guiding. I mean, man, you could really, I feel like, how are these people going to work together to get to this? I mean, it is kind of working together, especially when you're on a rope team or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I had one situation where we kind of had both of those things that I mentioned previously, where we were almost to the summit and the weather was not cooperating the way it was forecast at all. It got really bad really rapidly. And I just instantly made the decision, we're turning around right now. This is not going to get any better, and we got to leave before it gets dangerous. And so we turned around, but we had one extra day, and one of the group members wanted to go to the summit. The other two did not. And so I just all right, well, the weather's going to be good. You guys, I'll leave you guys alone. You hash it out. Tell me what we're going to do. And we'll make a plan from there. And they ended up deciding to bail and not go to the summit. They went home for Father's Day instead, I think. But yeah, like that.
That'd be crushing to me as a client.
Mm-hmm. Well, fortunately, they were all related. This was a brother, a sister, and then the sister's husband. So that's a little easier to deal with when you're all related. If you're not, then it's definitely can be harder. That's one of the challenges of being a client is, we try to. The first thing a guide service is going to do is they're going to try and screen people for fitness and make sure that people are fit enough, and find an appropriate objective for you to do. So if you're signing up for something and then they ask you your fitness level and it doesn't quite match up with what you're trying to do, then they're going to, put you in an appropriate place.
Yeah.
So you try to get screened for that in the beginning. And then the guide will have a pretty good idea within the first 30 to 60 minutes of hiking of if that client is going to be fit enough to go to the top. And if they're not, we'll try to help them understand that they are part of a group, part of a team, and make sure that they're feeling up for it. Because if they're going to find out that they can't make it, it needs to happen pretty close to camp. Because if it happens, mid route on a glacier, we got to turn the entire team around.
Yeah, that is something that I like being a guide, as being someone that I've guided my brother and stuff like that, but not like an official guide. But it is interesting, like your thoughts versus like the client's thoughts are so totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Like you already know that you can do this route. You've done it 100 times. You are more focused on them, whereas they're focused on themselves, right? And getting to the summit. You are just totally just focused on them and managing this group, because you already know that you can manage yourself. You already know that you can manage like the safety aspects and things like that. But now it's kind of comes down to the point where, like you said, if you get a client that is struggling, but now they're struggling halfway up or 3/4 of the way up, that's dangerous. Whereas you need to kind of suss that out at the start, because if you don't, the higher you get, the harder it's going to be to get down, the longer it's going to take.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we do. It's pretty effective at figuring out beforehand if it's going to work out or not. Because like I said, we know, like I'll do Mount Baker and I'll know within an hour which clients are going to be up for the challenge and which ones are not.
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah. And it really isn't very many that aren't. It's very few. It's like maybe 2% that are not fit enough.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah. I actually would have thought it would have been more, but
you may have different statistics with different guides or different companies. And I'm not saying that's a company-wide statistic for us, but that's just been my experience. I would say for my clients that I've guided, it's about 2%.
I mean, hey, they got skin in the game in terms of cash. They not only, most of them are probably flown out there. They got a lot wrapped up in this. And when more people have more skin in the game, they're more apt to take it a little more seriously. Maybe do a little training and things like that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Just let me ask you this. Have you ever left a piece of really important gear behind on one of your trips? Or have you been so scattered with where you put your notes for your trips that you kind of forgot a critical piece of information because it was something that you wrote down on a notepad that you didn't bring with you, I have a solution for you, and it's completely free. It's my free Notion outdoor hiking and adventure trip planner. So go in the show notes below, grab it for yourself. It's completely free, and keep building. We'll see you later.
How do you combat your own summit fever? So for people that don't know, summit fever is just like, it sounds, which is just, you pretty much everything clouds out and you just want to get to the summit. I'm sure that you have already worked this mostly out of your system through the years. What was that process like for you? How did that go?
Yeah. So, I mean, for the most part, when I'm guiding, there is no summit fever whatsoever because I've been to the top. And if the clients don't want to go, I'm happy to turn around. It just means I get to get home earlier and go to bed faster. It's just like, it's not a big deal. So there's no summit fever, but that's not true for everything. Because some of these things, there's some climbs that I've never climbed before. And so I'm guiding people on it, and I want to get to the top just as much as they do. And so there's definitely a drive to do that. And we've touched on a couple of the things that I do to combat that already. One of them is being present, right? Not attaching happiness to getting to the top, right? It's just, it's not attached to anything. So being present is one part of it. And then the other part is I have my own, I always set aside time to go do other things, right? So, maybe I don't get to the top of this objective this time, but I have time throughout my season where I'm going to go with friends, and we have the same, objectives in mind and the same mindsets in mind. And so I can always come back and do that objective, or I can always do another objective, and, because getting to the summit, I think it is important, right? There's a lot of satisfaction of getting to the summit. I'm doing the Bulger list. I'm basically peak bagging, right? So getting to the top is really important. And I like to do it fast, but so that's why I like to kind of set that aside for a time when I can just focus on that.
Yeah, perfect. And you touched on the Bulgers there, which is a question I was going to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
And how has your progress been with that? And I guess for the listeners that will probably be outside of Washington, can you tell them a little bit about what they are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've done about half of them. I think 55 of the 100. They're the top 100 peaks in Washington. And what makes them unique is that, and from Washington, your mountains are starting at sea level, whereas compared to Colorado, the plane that you're starting with is about a mile high. And so you might have a 14,000 foot peak, but if it starts at 5,000 or 6,000, then it's not as tall as some of the peaks in Washington because we start at sea level. So the prominence and the elevation gain is a lot for Washington peaks. And then also, the Pacific Northwest is unique in that we have a lot of glaciers. Whereas most of the other lower 48 states don't have any glaciers, or if they do, they're mostly extinct and there's just not much to it. So you have glacier crossings, and then the glaciers cut the mountains. And so you have really rugged terrain, much more rugged terrain in Washington than you're going to have in some of the other states. And you also have a lot of remoteness. There isn't as many roads in the North Cascades as there are in some of these other mountain ranges. And so when you combine all of those things together, it requires you to travel long distances. It requires you to have a lot of different skills. You got to be able to scramble. You got to be able to climb. You got to be comfortable exposure. You got to be able to cross glaciers. You got to be able to travel long distances and all those things. And so that's what makes those mountains particularly challenging to do all of them, is because you got to deal with all of those different challenges.
What an exceptional way to explain the Bulgers. That was freaking awesome. That was that actually gets me really stoked for the Bulgers.
Yeah. They're sweet. But you also see, they're so spread out everywhere. You see a really good amount of the state. After you've done that, you can be like, yes, I've seen Washington,
I think that it's not an accident that a lot of really good mountaineers come from Washington or live in Seattle. I didn't understand that before I kind of moved here and got involved with that type of climbing scene, even until 2-3 years ago, really. And you're totally right. I mean, you got 100 of these peaks. A lot of them can be super technical. It's all Alpine type stuff where you're got to know all these, just like you said, all these different facets of things that you've probably learned somewhere else. Like maybe you're a good climber, but now you got to learn how to do crevasse rescue, and you got to be good with endurance. You got to know how to backpack some of these things. Like it's just the conglomeration of all this stuff, as opposed to like a 14er that you can drive up to in Colorado.
Yeah. Opposite extremes, right? There's some hard stuff in Colorado too, but just in general, the average is that there's a lot more of those challenges in the Bulgars. Yeah.
So that's one of your goals, is to, eventually at one point complete the 100. What's another one of your biggest, most audacious goals that you have? That's maybe this year or, your next 5 years, something like that.
The most audacious. When I was reading your question earlier, actually, the first thing that popped in my mind was just finishing my house. It's definitely the most audacious goal I have.
Totally.
But as it relates to climbing and adventuring, I got a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of things on my to-do list. I mean, I want to finish that. I want to climb all the 14ers in Colorado and in California. I want to climb the highest point in all the western states, so basically just everything west of Colorado. I want to do the high points in all the national parks. And then globally, I want to. There's several distinctly different climbing cultures throughout the world, right? Like if you go to Yosemite and hang out there for a couple of weeks, you'll find that there's a really distinct climbing culture in Yosemite. But that culture is distinctly different from, say, the culture in the Pacific Northwest, which is totally different from the culture in like Indian Creek, Moab area. And that, that's totally different from, climbing McKinley, which is totally different from climbing in the Himalayas, going up to Everest Base Camp, which is different from climbing down to Patagonia, which is different than climbing the Alps, right? So they're all very distinctly different. It's not just a different rock. It's not just a different style of climbing, but the culture is different. Sometimes you're staying in a hut system. Sometimes you're allowed to fly helicopters into where you're going. Whereas like Washington, you can't fly any helicopters in the North Cascades. You got to hike wherever you're going. So It's like, I want to go experience all those different climbing cultures for what makes them unique to that area.
I love it.
That's my biggest goal.
So it's almost like you get to explore the area, but you also get to explore. You also get to be immersed in that culture as well, which is like a little bit more than just going to Yosemite National Park, right? You're actually like getting involved and immersing yourself into that very nuanced culture of that, almost like dirtbag climbers, right? Like in Yosemite, I think it is kind of right. Yeah, like that type of style.
Yeah, so if you went to Yosemite, what type of climbing are you going to do in Yosemite, right?
Yeah, it would be like, just like I don't know. Are you asking me? I have no idea.
Yeah.
Slab climbing? I don't know. Granite?
You're going to be on a giant big wall, sleeping in a portaledge on the side of a cliff for a week and pooping in a bag, right? That's the full experience.
Yeah, that is the full experience. I'm gonna stand this up real quick. Get up. Yes, no, I totally agree with that. And here's one thing that I think is really cool too, and I think it kind of goes with your points of one, being present, but also like being happy basically where you're at when you are doing these goals. And that just kind of is the person. It's the person that you have to become in order to conquer these goals is like the thing that's actually alluring to me than actually sometimes maybe doing the goal. I think like when you're in that training period, when you have to like, you're struggling with like those turn back moments of when you're actually doing the goal or training for the goal or something like that. Like, I think that's really what counts for a lot of, the experience and the skills that you learn and like your happiness after, because you then take that, like I was saying with the Bulgars, you have to be versed in all these different areas, and you learn these skills by different objectives that you then carry to something else.
Yeah, and that thing that you carry, it develops it develops a level of confidence in being able to tackle something. I always say, in my professional world, it's, when you've got all these different things on your resume and all these different experiences and places that you worked, it's not the individual skills that you've learned by doing all those different things that's important. What's important is the perspective that you've gained by doing all those different things. So it changes your perspective, which changes how you can, which changes your confidence and what you're able to accomplish.
100%. Yes, and that's why I think that kind of answers sometimes why we do hard things. I think that kind of wraps it up, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, dude, this is really good, and I kind of have a lot of questions for you. I don't want to keep you for a long time, though. We're almost at like an hour, so you tell me when you got to roll.
I'm good for whenever. I mean, I don't know how long people are going to watch this thing, but
no, I think
you keep rolling how long you want to go.
No, I think this is going to be good. Okay, sweet. So, kind of going back to some of the guiding things, I do have a couple of questions I still want to ask with that, which is, what advice would you give someone that is new to mountaineering or outdoor adventure, or who wants to get maybe started in the guiding field? Like, what advice would you give them in particular?
Okay. Well, I definitely find a mentor, whether that mentor is a guide, for sure. Yep. And whether they're a guide or whether they're an experienced climber, you want to get a mentor. And then the next part is kind of goes hand in hand with that. And it's like, you want, one of the things is don't go out and buy a bunch of gear at REI. You want to get with somebody an expert, someone who really knows what they're doing, and ask them before you buy anything, because then you're just going to end up buying it twice, right? And climbing is really expensive. That's one of the huge barriers to entry. Yeah, Chad's laughing because he's got a few pieces of gear in mind, don't you?
I do, man. Yeah. My rope! Stupid blue rope. Actually, we like that blue rope, though, don't we? We do kind of like that Beal Opera. I think I actually made a good purchase there. It was okay, but definitely, you're 100% right. Like some of the stuff I bought, I'm like, what am I doing?
What was the thing with the rope? Was it a 50 meter? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I think it was. Okay. It was just kind of a shorter rope. We actually used it for the wrap at Sahali, though, and it works pretty well. Or did we take your rope? I forget what we
brought my rope.
Yeah,
we brought we brought my rope. Yeah, because it was really short pitch, and we knew we weren't going to need the whole thing.
Yeah, that was the thing. Yeah, but okay, so finding a mentor, number one, and then through that mentor, you can also figure out what exactly do I need instead of buying this random gear that such and such on YouTube recommended, or that I think maybe I need type of thing.
Exactly. Because otherwise you're going to buy it. You're going to buy it twice. You're going to buy it 3 times, over, 20 years of doing this stuff, I've bought everything. Right. And, you don't need to.
Yeah.
Just buy the good stuff right from the beginning.
I can't underscore the mentor part more, by the way, because I think that that's so invaluable. I mean, like I was talking about, you can read how to rappel and you can practice rappelling as much as you want, at your house and stuff like that. But being out there when we've gone and stuff, and seeing you do that, and I have a rock climbing partner, just getting around people that are way better than you at something, just 10x's your learning so quickly. And it's, I used to not be very receptive to mentors because of my ego when I was younger. And I was like, no, I know how to do this. I can do this. And I don't know what that was. What, have you ever been like that? Or has that ever been? Yeah.
Oh yeah. For sure. Same reasons, same reasons. I remember I remember when I was in college, there was an ice climb 30 minutes away. It was next to this rock climbing area, and I didn't have any ice climbing experience. We just rented some tools from the college, rental center, and we just went and did it. It was a 3-pitch ice climb. I don't know. We got some ice screws, we got some tools and crampons, and just went and did it. Which is, I mean, it's kind of cool. It's like the Wild West. It's like, more like caveman days. It's like, but you're it's a lot of risk, and the learning curve is long. It takes a long time.
Yeah.
So I learned it all the hard way. Everything that I did, I learned the hard way. But I wouldn't do it that way again.
Yeah. And that's a good point to underscore too, is like, it is a lot of risk. You can get by without a mentor in a lot of other things if you want to. It's just, you're going to have a slower time learning. But with mountaineering and things like that and climbing, if you don't have the correct mentor or any at all, that can be very risky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I did have a mentor for most of my things. My uncle got me climbing when I was 12, I think was the first mountaineering trip I did. And then I ended up, or maybe it was 14, doesn't matter. Ended up climbing Rainier with him when I was 16. So he taught me a lot of the mountaineering skills to get me started. It was after that, all the other things that I added on, that I just like decided I was just going to do it. Like ice climbing, I'm just like going to go learn how to do that, or rock climbing, and just like learn how to do that on my own.
Interesting. What about now? As I know you're not like, I know, like to you like to be very humble. I get it. He knows his stuff, though, ladies and gentlemen. I know this. Do you have a mentor, though, that you look for, even though you're at this maybe like advanced stage now? Like, is there anybody that you look up to currently, or you maybe get advice from, or when you go on trips, maybe you're learning quite a bit from?
Absolutely. There's a lot of people. I would like there to be just kind of like a go-to, like formal mentor, but I don't really think mentors work that way. I don't know anybody who has like a formal mentor. So that'd be cool if I did, but generally I have a lot of people, like being involved with the American Mountain Guiding Association. There's lots of courses that I've taken with instructors, and so I have relationships with those instructors, and I can always ask them tips or ask them questions about whatever I have a question about. But I also have the team that I work with at Pro Guide Service. I got Martin, the owner, and I can always go to him. There's some of the more senior guides that I can always go to them with things as well. So I definitely have a big community of people that I can share information with and learn from.
Mm-hmm. So
that's where I go.
Instead of like maybe one single mentor, you have this giant, almost mastermind of resources at your disposal, because you're involved with all these programs and these groups and everything. Yeah.
If I were a recreationalist wanting to get into mountaineering, I would try to find, if you're plugged in with a big community, awesome. I would try to find someone who can give you a roadmap and tell you, like, this is what you need to do, and this is what order in which you need to do it. A roadmap from, point A to point B. That would be the most efficient way to learn. And if you like, what I do recommend to clients a lot is private trips. If you just hire a guide to take you on a private trip for a couple of days, and you give them specifically what you want to learn, then you're not subject to other people who are, you don't know, showing up, and maybe they're not on the same level, maybe they don't have the same goals, maybe they're not as fit. So you don't have that. But you can also, that guide can cater that education specifically to you and specifically to your goals. And then, that you can, if you build a rapport with that guide, you have a relationship with them, you can always do several other trips with them, and they can create that roadmap for you to help you get from point A to B much faster than like, joining like a volunteer organization, for example.
Cool. Yeah. So it's just way more customized. You're, again, immersed. It's just like you and the guide, rather than this a mentor kind of teaching a giant group. I see that a lot, which is fine. Like if you're strapped for money and things like that, or whatever, wherever situation you're in. But it's kind of a difference between how fast you want to learn the skills. It's the time piece that you'd be paying for. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. In those big group situations, like that's really common in when the goal is the mountain, right? The peak. So like if you're climbing Rainier, for instance, it's really common just throw a bunch of people onto a rope team, and it's basically like summit manufacturing, right? They're just manufacturing summits. They're putting as many people through that program as they possibly can to get a bunch of people to summit, because the demand is really, really high to climb Mount Rainier, for instance. But what we're talking about is, the objective might not necessarily be, or the primary objective may not necessarily be to go to the summit. The primary objective is to learn. And so if that's the objective, then it's totally different. We cater it to specifically what that individual wants to take away from it.
Love it. I love it. Awesome. Can you tell me about a particular memorable or exciting time you've led as a guide? So not your own personal ones, but something you've actually, let's say it was something that you've guided 100 times or whatever, but it just was very memorable to you because of X reason.
Yeah. The picket range. I did that last summer. I think it was last summer. It might have been the summer before, actually. I don't remember. The years are blurring together a little bit for me. But went to the pickets for the first time ever. And the pickets are something that I've just been like dreaming about doing since I was a little kid. Like I had posters of the pickets on my wall when I was like 15 years old. And we just never went there because you'd have to take like a week off from work and you'd have to go in there and be a lot of suffering. You had to be carrying a lot of gear. It'd be like a really long, hard trip. And so never went there, but I got an opportunity to do that with these clients they basically just said, hey, where do you want to go? Where would you take us if you had your pick? I was like, well, let's go to the pickets. And it really was just like this magical fairyland where unicorns are from. Like it's pretty wild. Yeah.
Where is this? I've never even heard of it.
It's north of the town of New Halem in the North Cascades, north of Highway 20, kind of between Mount Baker on the west and like the town of Mazama on the east.
Okay, I'm pulling it up right here. Dang, that is yeah, dude, that looks rugged.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely rugged.
There's just like what you said with the. I mean, is anything? There's probably some boulders that mixed in there, huh? Well, that's kind of across from Shuckson, a little bit.
It's further east of Shuckson. There is one boulder there, I think, Luna.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not as tall as some of the boulders, but they're every bit, if not more, rugged.
Yeah, the North Cascades are just so wild, wild. It's always the common thing of the people on the PCT love the North Cascades and the Sierra, but most of them say that they like the North Cascades the most out of anything on the PCT. And I had never understood that until I was in the North Cascades a couple years ago for the first time. And you're right, totally magical.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's this on the top of one of these peaks. I remember looking just down the line of this ridge of all these peaks, and it looks like it's like 5 Matterhorns all lined up in a row. Like they're as jagged and as sharp and as iconic looking as the Matterhorn, but there's 5 of them. It's just like you're just in awe when you're up there.
Just go on for forever.
Yeah.
What was the objective there? Was that kind of a custom trip that they did? They
it was
skills type of thing. Yeah, got you.
Yeah, they just wanted to elevate their skills to the next level. They had done a lot of scrambling, and they had just moved to Washington from Colorado, and so they wanted to kind of fill in the gaps of their knowledge and their skills. And so we needed to do something that was pretty well rounded. So we went out there for 5 days, and we taught them crevasse rescue. We kind of went out there with a loose plan on what peaks we're going to climb, and we ended up climbing two of them while we were out there. And we actually had to leave early because a bear ate a lot of our food when we were gone, despite all of our best efforts to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Unbelievable. While you were in camp or what? Oh, wow. Yeah. Unbelievable. Yeah, there you go. There you go, folks. They love that food. Dang. Well, that must have been a great time for them. I bet they still learned just, again, at a rapid pace, custom stuff, exactly what they wanted. Yeah. Be curious to see like what they're up to in 2023. Wonder what they got for objectives. Probably some boulders.
I'm going to try and get them up to some boulders. I've been on a couple of like personal trips, like going on trail runs with one of them a couple of times. So.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
I generally know what he's up to, but they did so much driving in Colorado going around from 14er to 14er that they spend a lot of time just climbing in the Cascades. Like right at Snoqualmie Pass, right where they live. They live really close to the mountains, which is cool.
Interesting. So they're like, screw the driving, man.
I'm
done with the driving. I'm gonna look at all this gem that I have right next to me. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm so jealous of everybody that lives up in that area. I mean, like, same with me. I mean, I live 2 hours from Hood. That's the closest peak to me, basically, right? And if I go to Hood, I have to stay there at least overnight. So I'm staying in my car or I'm camping. Like, I can't just go there for the day. 2 hours, it's just too much, and I have to make 2 days out of it. So
yeah, I feel
it's really sweet that you guys get to do just those like one-offers. That's so cool. So now, I guess this is a good transition to when we move to Wyoming. Like I said, we've kind of alluded this a little bit. So we have a trip planned later this summer. And this is kind of like that Alpine experience. We got the Grand Teton. We're looking at Mount Moran, Gannett Peak, and then some stuff in the Cirque if we have time to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a big agenda. But I'll be happy if we can do half that stuff. I'm completely honest with you. But hey, I'll shoot for it. I got the time off. I can do it. So what advice would you give, knowing me, what advice would you give me for training for that? And I think one of them is the exposure piece, right?
Yeah, that really is the piece. Because I know that you're fit enough. You've got a great workout plan. You're constantly active. You're doing a lot of that stuff. So that's not going to be an issue. And really the technical climbing is because we're doing Alpine. When you're doing Alpine, we generally scale it back and we're doing easier stuff. And so we're doing like 5.6, 5.5. I think maybe at hardest we might do a 5.8. I don't remember what our full plan is, but at 5.8 maximum. So it's not a really hard climbing. It's just going to be a lot of terrain to cover because we're doing Alpine climbing. We're doing lots and lots of, it's not even necessarily pitches, but you're just covering a lot of terrain. And so we're going to have to be moving very quickly on easy rock climbing terrain. So it's not trivial. It's serious. And we're going to be protected, but it's not like you have a piece of gear every 6 feet, right? You got a piece of gear like maybe every 40, so you don't want to fall. And although falling is unlikely because it's on easy terrain, it's still possible. And most of your protection when you're on Alpine climbing is provided by your movement skills. It's not by the rope. So the rope saves your life, but your movement skills prevent you from getting hurt. They prevent you from falling. And so you really want to focus on getting really comfortable with exposure and moving quickly on exposed technical terrain.
Interesting. So for folks that don't know, so obviously this will be like trad climbing, traditional versus sport climbing, right? Which, and tell me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of how it works in my head is you do sport climbing because you really want to push your climbing skills and your climbing grade, and you want to be like, grr, like I can climb a 513, whatever, right? But trad climbing is you bring down the climbing, but you almost kind of up the risk a little bit in terms of like, because you're relying on the pieces that you're putting in there. Like you're saying, you're putting them every 40 feet or so, but you reduce the climbing, but you're getting more adventure in it because you're like going to these wilder places. It lets you access these like crazy places, like the Circuit of the Towers. That's crazy beautiful. So, but you're bringing the climbing down a little bit so you can get a better adventure type of thing. Is that kind of how it works? Yeah,
definitely. Sport climbing is about the climbing itself, like how hard the climbing is. That's the priority. Whereas trad climbing is mostly about the objective. Like there's a really cool feature on that cliff, like that crack looks very aesthetic. Like I want to climb that crack. So what sort of gear, what type of climbing do I need to do to climb that crack? Or that peak over there looks really majestic. I want to climb that specific peak. So what skills and tools do I need in the toolbox to be able to climb that specific peak? And so that's where trad climbing comes into play, is because you're going after an objective that is, remote in nature, alpine in nature, wild in nature, and it's not going to have all of the infrastructure in place. It's not going to have, anchors or are necessarily going to have trails. So you have to bring the tools that will allow you to protect that climb. And so that's why you need trad gear.
I love it. I just feel like it opens up just like a brand new world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because once I feel like, you know, once you learn how to backpack, that opens up that's like the key that unlocks all these doors to like a wider thing. Like if rather than if you're just a car camper or something like that, you now have like extra. But now trad climbing is another step to where now you're getting on top of these things that you're actually looking at, or you're going to these places that you wouldn't normally go even backpacking maybe, but like you want to climb them, you know.
Yep.
So it's just kind of just opens up, and it's just way more appealing to me than just being a sport climber. So yeah,
me too.
That's good to know. Yeah. Let's get into let's get into these IG questions and we'll wrap it up here.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Let's get into boom. Okay. So we have a question from Tiny Giant Hikes. How unfit is too unfit for you to decline a client? And would you alter plans beyond just adjusting times?
Yeah.
We kind of touched on this a little bit, but
yeah, we did. So just reiterate, like the guide service, or if it's an individual guide, is going to do most of that vetting in advance. So that doesn't happen, right? Because that ruins the trip for everybody else. So they're going to do that most of advance, and by asking the clients, you know, what have you done before? What's your hiking or climbing resume look like, right? If I'm working with a client and we're working towards a specific objective, I give like a training plan. Like, so the training plan you got to follow in order to be prepared for this objective that we're doing. But if I'm meeting them on the site or on site at the trailhead for the first time, and maybe they weren't as forthcoming as they should have been with what their fitness level is, or maybe they just didn't quite understand exactly what the demand was going to be. I'll find out. I'll know that, like I said before, I'll know that within 30 to 60 minutes of climbing it. And the reason I know that is because I've climbed the mountain, you know, let's just say it's Mount Baker. I've climbed it probably 25 times, and I know exactly what it's going to feel like how fast my legs are going to go and how long it's going to take to get to camp. And how, you know, I just know that pacing. And so I just go that pace. And if there's somebody in the group we are constantly stopping to wait for them to catch up, then the likelihood that they're going to be able to make it to the top is really, really low. So that's how I know. And we can adjust the objective accordingly. You know, if we know that in advance, we can make different plans for that person. Like if we have two guides, for instance, we can be a little flexible. Maybe one of those guides can take part of the group and they can just teach, you know, really advanced crevasse rescue. We can spend a lot more time on that so that client gets a better education while the rest of the climbers are going to the top, right? So there's always ways to adjust the plan. No guides have a rigid way of how they operate. They don't have they don't operate robotically. They don't have like all these rules that they have to fit in within how they operate in a group. We have a lot of tools instead of rules. So we'll adjust our plan. We'll adjust the strategy. We'll adjust the education or the experience depending on the weather and, you know, just the general circumstances of the trip. And that could be weather. That could be the client fitness. That could be anything.
Yeah. So. Awesome. So he's always watching, folks. He's watching you. He's got his eye on you. No, that's good. Cool. Okay, Jack Cunnison. What is a good order of mountains for a beginner to accomplish? And I would say let's do this as if you lived in Portland or Seattle, something around like that, because I believe that is where he's from. And yeah, I think that's where a lot of my followers are from as well. So yeah, what would you say for that?
Yeah, so assuming we're talking about general mountaineering objectives, right? Because there's all kinds of different objectives, right?
I know he's interested he's actually doing Shasta in a couple months or something like that. So I think he's kind of on that level.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So I have a list of peaks that I would suggest. In Washington, I really like Ruth Mountain.
Nice.
It's got like a almost extinct glacier on it, so it's not super intense. And then if you got time, you want to add a little bit of extra on it, you can do the traverse over to Icy Peak. That's a sweet objective. And then, Sahali Peak, that's a classic. I would probably go via the Key and Save Glacier if you want to get a little bit more glacier experience versus the Sahali arm. Sulphide Glacier on Shuxton is a really good classic. East Ridge of El Dorado is another one.
Yeah.
So those are all like super classics that you can find everywhere. But I would definitely don't get too sucked into only doing the classics. There's a lot of amazing stuff out there that only reason they're not super classics is because they're hard to get to.
How would you? Yeah, exactly. Like El Dorado is way up there for me, dude.
That's one of the close ones, dude.
Oh my gosh, and it's freaking up. Actually, we drove past it to get to Sahali, didn't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Oh my dude, it's a long way for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about? I want to come back. I want to put actually, I'll just ask you it right now. Shuxton is one that I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. What's that summit like? How technical is that? Say like in a July or something like that.
Yeah, so it's a pretty easy glacier climb, as I'm sure you know, getting to the summit pyramid. And then once you get to the summit pyramid, there's a couple of different routes you can take. One of them is just a class 4 scramble, like right up to the middle of the pyramid. But there's another ridge climb that's like a 5-4 that's I would highly recommend. It's a lot better. It's got some good exposure. It's got really solid rock. It's fun climbing, but it's not hard.
And you would say that Sahali was class 4?
Maybe have a 5th class move. It's got 5th class exposure, that's for sure. Maybe like 1 5th class move. And you remember, you know which move it
is. You remember? I do remember. I sat at that for a good 5 minutes, talking myself into it. Yeah. So when you say, sometimes I have a difficult time deciphering the definition 4th class and 5th class. So like when you just said there, 5th, it's a 4th class, but it was 5th class exposure, right? What is really the difference between 4th and 5th class? They seem very similar to me.
Well, you don't start using your hands at all until you get into 3rd class, right? So if you're not using your hands, it's not 3rd class. So you get into there, and it's occasional use of hands. And you can look up probably a better description than I'll be able to recall online. Just look up, like, it's in the Freedom of the Hills of Mountaineering. You can look at the descriptions from class 1 to 5. But from what I remember, you're not using your hands until you get into class 3. And then when you get in class 4, you're frequently using your hands, like all the time. You're using your hands and knees or hands and feet. And as the exposure goes up and as the consequences go up, so does the class, right? So when you get into like 5th class, that's where it's like really measuring difficulty. Right, so like 5-1, 5-2, 5-3, 5-4. So like those decimal systems, the Yosemite decimal system is a continuation of that 5th class. So once you get into 5-0, it just kind of goes up into there, and we're strictly talking about difficulty at that point. But until you get into 5th class, you're talking about difficulty and exposure, likelihood of falling. So like 4th class is, you might have pretty high consequences, but your likelihood of falling is really, really low because it's super easy terrain. It's like climbing a ladder, right? Whereas 3rd class is like not really an exposure. It's just your occasional use of your hands.
Yeah. I think
does that answer your question?
I think Sahali's a 5-1.
Okay, sure. 5-1. Yeah. Well, that's a good point, because like you can have a climb that it's going to have a rating, even if it only has 1 move. Like you might have a climb that has 159 move on the entire thing. That route is rated 5.9, even if the entire rest of the route is like
interesting.
5.2, right? It's going to be rated by the hardest move.
That's interesting. That's actually interesting to know. Okay, cool. Good to know. And what would you say? What would you say a good progression is for the Cascade Volcanoes? What recommendation would you give?
I'll go back to that in a second. The scale, though, once you get into the fives, it is not objective. It is extremely subjective, right? One person might rate it 5.6. Another person might rate it 5.8. Maybe one person is really comfortable with exposure. Another one isn't comfortable with exposure. So those are all factors that go into it. Maybe someone is like 5.6, and the other one is like 6.5. You know, there are foot difference in height. That can change things as well. So it's very, very subjective rating scale. So take it with a grain of salt.
Totally. I have figured that out. I mean, when I was in Colorado, we were climbing outside of Golden, and it was this 5.8. I couldn't do it, dude. It was, you know, the parts that I struggle with are those arêtes where they come out, they jut out, and then I have to climb the face, but there's a bolt like what kind of above, and then I feel like I'm going to deck if I screw that up. But you kind of have like this foothold that you really have to trust to get your reach to that bolt. And there was like 2 routes like that recently this fall that I did, and I kind of wigged myself out on both of those. So I've been taking some practice falls at the gym, and you know, we did 2 practice falls yesterday at the gym, so that did help. Yeah, that stuff does help. So
yeah, well, it depends on when it was put up too. That's a factor, and who put it up. So you know, in the early days of climbing, they used to think that 5.10. They were climbing in mountaineering boots, right? They didn't have rock shoes at this time when they first started the Yosemite decimal system, and so they made all these ratings with the idea that 5.10 was as high as it was going to go. So if you're imagining 5.10 being as hard as anyone can possibly climb ever, and you're rating your climb, you're going to do it relative to that 5.10 mark. And so that is a huge factor in when and how these things got rated. So if it was put up in like the 60s, it's probably going to be a pretty stiff climb. And then the other thing that matters is who put it up. Some of these guys were giants, like Leighton Core, for instance. Anytime I get on one of his routes, I'm terrified because it's like going to be way harder than I have bargained for sure. So.
So true, man. That is true. And that is kind of the tricky part about climbing. Whereas like, you know, running, ultra running or whatever, you have a distance. It's always going to be that distance. 100 miles, it's 50 miles, whatever, man. It's that distance. Climbing is like, I read all these trip reports before I go. Some people are like, exactly what you're saying. Oh, it was that. You don't need a wrap. Oh, you do need a wrap. And like, oh, it makes your head spin sometimes. So I suppose it just kind of, you get that experience as you go on and kind of get more into that scene. So, yeah.
So back to volcanoes.
Yeah, what would be the volcano progression? Because I think that's what he might be going for as he's starting to do Shasta.
Sure, absolutely. Well, St. Helens is probably the shortest and the easiest of the volcanoes, so I'd probably go for that one first. And then after that, I'd probably go for Adams second because it's non-glaciated also. So, or at least the standard south route is non-glaciated, so you can go up that without having to have a rope. And then after that, I would probably go for Baker. And then I would probably Glacier Peak is probably harder than Rainier. So I'd probably do that last if you're trying to go in order of how hard they are. But takeaway for that question is don't get lured into just climbing the volcanoes because they're big slogs. And the view from Rainier, for instance, is like the view from a 7 or from a 777. You know, it looks the same. It's better. The best view Rainier is the one looking at Rainier rather than from it. And I've found personally that the most rewarding experiences are in the jagged, craggy peaks in the North Cascades, and not so much in the volcanoes. So yeah, you're going to do them because they're prominent, and you look at them every day when you commute to work. So yes, absolutely do them, but don't stop there.
I love that. So just because you did all of the tallest Cascade Volcanoes.
Yeah.
You can expand your skills on these actually probably a lot, harder peaks, more challenging type peaks where you're not going to see as many people and you're going to learn a lot more skills or need more skills to do that. Yeah. How is Glacier Peak? So Glacier Peak's a little bit harder than,
it's harder.
Like middle of freaking nowhere, right?
Yeah. It's double the mileage of Rainier.
Yeah. And you're right. Rainier is a slog. And to be completely honest with you, I don't even remember the view from Rainier because we started at 10 p.m. or 9:30 p.m., went all night, got up there, and I was so altitude sick. I was just like, I don't know, bro. And then you had to go past down that big crater and up to the side. I'm like, this is so stupid. And I was just like so mad. And yeah, but I mean, it's cool to say that you did it for sure.
Yeah, dude, let's go do it again. We'll just let's do it again in a day. Let's do it in a 12-hour period. That'll be way more fun for you.
It's hilarious because I called Josh before I did Rainier for some beta, and he's just like, "Oh yeah, I would never." He's just like, it's not that fun. It's just a slog. I wouldn't really want to do it again, type of thing. And I totally have that feeling. Yeah. It was a really interesting climb.
I feel like such a curmudgeon about Rainier. Don't take it that way. Hopefully.
Yeah. No, it's totally a beautiful mountain. And actually the crevasses were, I mean, that made it worth it. That was really cool. I mean, why don't you build a house in one of those crevasses? I mean, it's got space in there. It's probably,
no kidding.
You can hang some paintings and put some ice screws in the walls and hang things there. They were massive, dude.
Yeah, they were pretty wild. It'd be fun. You just gave me an idea. We could do like this really cool like Airbnb experience. We could get a portal edge, right? Get a portal edge, and we could attach it to the wall of a crevasse, and you could spend the night in the crevasse.
You heard it here first. Heard it here first. That is so funny, dude. How much would you charge, though?
Oh, how much is Four Seasons? Yeah.
I don't know, dude. That would really be the question: is how much would you? I could see it being really premium or like dirt cheap. It's nowhere in the middle.
You choose your lane, yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Okay.
Yeah, but takeaway for Rainier is like, it would sadden me to see somebody do all this training and buy all this gear, go to the top of Rainier just to cross it off a bucket list, and then never climb another mountain again for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And sadly, that happens a lot. That happens a lot for that mountain in particular. Yeah, a lot of people just do Rainier and never do anything else because they've been looking at it every day, every time they go to work for years, and it's on their bucket list. But they never really get to truly experience mountaineering because Rainier, I don't think, is it's not a fair representation of mountaineering. It leaves you with the impression that it's all pain, and there's a reward at the top, but it's more pain. Like the ratio is just really challenging.
Interesting. Yeah. The bowling alley was pretty interesting.
On Hood?
Is that what it's called? The bowling alley on Rainier?
Oh, yeah. I think that's just a nickname for the Disappointment Cleaver.
Yeah. Okay. So it was just like where it was all of this rocky, freaking thing there, and we actually coming down, we kind of got off track, and we were like almost kind of like cliffed out. I don't know why we went like straight down, like the fall line down. And then we were going to try to cross the slope, but we had already taken our crampons off. And I was like looking at it, I'm like, dude, we're either going to have to put our crampons on and go across the slope, which is kind of sketchy, and there's not a very good fall on this, or we're going to have to climb all the way back up and then go over. And that's exactly what we ended up doing. But it was just kind of one of those things where you're so tired, you're just like, I don't even know like what's happening right now type of thing. But yeah, Rainier's fun. But okay, let's see. We got two more. Theo Claffey, any near-death experiences? I'm sure
several.
This question comes. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure there's got to be several.
Yeah,
what's the one that stands out the most to you, I guess?
Well, they're all rockfall related.
Interesting.
Every single one of them is rockfall related. Yeah.
Wear those helmets, folks.
Yep, wear those helmets for sure. I can almost like name each one of them.
Really?
Like there's like, there's like the refrigerator rockfall, and then there's the gas station rockfall, because it's the rock that fell was the size of a gas station.
No.
Yeah, I'm not kidding you. Yeah. So, all right. Maybe I'll do the closest call. And that was, I was in the Alps climbing in Switzerland on this multi-pitch climb with my wife. And I was leading on like easy terrain. And I go to like mantle. Mantling is when you put your hands up on a rock and then you try and get your foot up onto that same rock and climb up on top of that. And so I was doing that, and that rock kind of like shifted and then slid on the slab that I was standing on onto my foot, and it kind of pinned my foot. So I couldn't move, but at least the rock was stopped.
What?
And I yelled down to my wife that, you know, there's this block and it's going to fall and you're like right below it. And so she like gets into position where she can hide underneath this overhang. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm realizing that if I let it go, it's going to like cut the rope that I'm tied to, or it's going to pull me off.
Whoa,
one of the two. It's
dude.
going to do that if I let it go. Right. So I had to like look around for, I had to look around for like just whatever I could reach, because I couldn't move around very much. And I found like this kind of pathetic gear placement. So I plug in a cam and I clip into it, and then I untie from the two ropes that I'm tied into, and then just chuck them as far away as I possibly could. And yelled on to her. She's ready. I let the rock go, and it like tumbles down, and she's like trying to figure out like where's she going to go. She's going to dodge right or left. She dodged this rock, and she tries to jump out of the way, and her foot slips. And this thing hits her right in the hip, like right in just the meatiest part of her hip.
No way.
And I can just like hear her screaming down below, and I thought I killed her. It was like super dramatic. So I ended up like scrambling down to where I threw the rope, and I tied it off and built a new anchor, propelled down to her, and checked her out. And she was, you know, okay. She didn't have any like broken bones or anything, but she was in a lot of pain. So we got her out, stayed the night in the hut, and we had to hike out the next day and go to the hospital. But she ended up being okay, but it was a close call.
Wow. And then it's like, you don't even know, was there like, my concern too would be, is there other climbers below me too?
We knew there weren't. Fortunately, we knew they weren't. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So basically you untied from the main rope, but you did a cam into like somewhere, you basically attached like your pass to the cam. Oh, interesting. So you're just hanging there by your cam, or not hanging there, but you're just attached, you know, secured, I guess.
Well, fortunately, it was really easy terrain, so I could just basically stand on it. It was like fourth class terrain. So I was pretty sure that I could just pull my foot out and then step aside, and then the rock would fall out. But not a great situation.
Okay, so that's actually really interesting, because I do think that me and most people always think that, I mean, and there is, of course, plenty of accidents that happen this way from falling, but would you say that there's more probably due to rock fall?
Yes, absolutely. If you ask me what the number one thing I'm afraid of in the mountains, it's rock fall. Yeah. But pretty much all the danger in the mountains, it's either falling off the mountain, falling in the mountain, or the mountain falling on you. Those are the three things that can happen.
Yeah, no kidding.
But definitely the mountain falling on you is what I've experienced to be the most dangerous.
Wow. That is some intense stuff, man. That is intense. Wow. Cool. Okay. Final question here is from Brad Dosh. Actually, I met him at Rainier when I got done with it.
Oh, nice.
I was a zombie pretty much. He said, and I don't know if you've done this or not. I've never even heard of this. But what's the route like for East McMillan?
East McMillan Spire. Yeah. He must be asking, I don't know, maybe he's looked at my Instagram and saw that I was climbing that, but that's actually the route that I did when I was in the pickets with my clients. The route's amazing. The view from the summit of East McMillan is the best view I've seen in the Cascades. It's incredible. That's the view I was describing earlier. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a bold statement right there.
I don't make it lightly. I really don't.
I know you don't. Yeah, because the one off of Sahali is pretty sweet, I thought.
Yeah, well, that one is pretty sweet. The second best view I've ever seen the Cascades was from the summit of Ostera Peak, which is on the Inspiration Traverse.
Okay.
It's a really close competitor. But anyway, what the route is like, it's a long, really challenging approach to get in there, but it's definitely worth it. I wouldn't go in there unless you're going to either spend 4 or 5 days there and get comfy, or if you're going to get just like go blast it out in a day. But you're going to have to like think more like a trail runner. You do that. And if I was going to go there and do it in a day, I'd probably do like west of McMillan, because it's just a class 3 scramble. And I wouldn't have to bring any technical gear. But back to the route, it's like pretty easy rock climbing. It's not super challenging. The route finding is what is most challenging. And so for that, I would go and download as much beta photos as you can from online and from every angle that you can find them. And then from the basin where you're camping, make sure you're looking at your beta photo and comparing it with the route from like long distance at camp, medium distance as you're approaching it, and then right at the base of the climb. So you can make sure that you're starting on route. We were able to stay on route pretty good, but that's only because I had a lot of like beta photos to follow. So
that's okay. That actually sparks a side question for me is when you are researching some of these maybe places, bulgers or something that you haven't done before, what's your research process look like for that? What are the sites that you use? And what notes are you taking by? It sounds like you're taking screenshots of pictures of routes and things like that. Super smart, especially because obviously, as you know, you're not going to have service up there, so you got to have them on your phone somehow.
You do. So I mean, we're really lucky to be living in the time that we're living in right now, because we have access to the GPS tracks and everything. I remember when I was first started climbing, all we had was paper topo maps. We didn't have mobile phones. We had GPSs, but you didn't have maps on the GPS. Like those GPS, eventually we had those, but there was no map on them. So you have to like plug in the coordinate and then just like walk the direction of that coordinate. But like, what if there's a cliff between you and where you're going? Like, it was just a lot harder to navigate. And so because of that, we did a lot of the same things over and over again because we knew the routes. But now we have the technology so advanced that we can utilize that. So what I do is if it's a rock climb, I definitely need to have route photos that other people have taken. That's really, really helpful. It's particularly if it's a harder route, because if it's a harder route, there's more or less like one way you can go, right? You can't just go up the east face. That's not description enough. If it's an easy climb, you can get away with some vague directions, but if it's a harder climb, you got to know where you're going. So getting route photos, reading the route description, taking screenshots of that so you have it, like you said, when you don't have service. And if it's a non-technical thing, the GPS coordinates or the track is the most important thing. And I get those from peakbagger.com. I'll just go and I'll Google search.
Interesting.
I'll just Google search GPX and then the name of the peak. And Peak Bagger is usually like the first or second hit. And then I click on that. And then on the left-hand side, you're going to see a bunch of trip reports. And there's going to be, let's say hypothetically, there's 20 different trip reports. Maybe 7 or 8 of them are going to have GPX in it, and it's going to say the name of the trip, and it's going to say GPX. So you only click on the GPX ones, and then when you do that, make sure that it was a successful attempt. They actually made it to the summit, because it may not have the entire track. Also check the date that it was done, because if it was done in the winter time and you're going to be climbing in the summertime, it might be taking you through like some heavily vegetated terrain where it's not going to be passable when you're there because you're in the summertime. So look at when that track was made as well, if you're going to do it that way. So I download the GPX track onto my phone, and I use like either CalTopo or Gaia to navigate that route. But when I have that, I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to get lost, because it's just it's been so reliable.
Right. I agree. I love that. I love that. Yeah. So that's probably what our MO will be for Wyoming. I'm guessing kind of that type of. You ever use Mountain Project?
I do, yeah, for rock climbs. So like everything that we're going to be doing, is an Alpine rock climb, and they're all classics. So there's tons of information online, and we'll probably get most of our information from Mountain Project for what you and I are going to be doing.
Got it. Okay, sweet.
So we'll just get GPX files for the approaches.
Yeah, that'll be sweet. Awesome, man. Yeah. Well, this was, dude, so much gold here. I mean, so much value for people that are going to get into mountaineering, or even for people that have been doing mountaineering. I mean, there's so much to learn from this type of stuff. And so Josh was kind of like your personal mentor for the day. I love it. That was so nice of you. So incredible time. Where can they, let's say they want to book a route with you, a climb with you, or something like that. How would they do that?
They can just reach out to me. I don't know what information you can provide, but they can look me up on Instagram or whatever, and I'll set it up for them.
Cool. Well, I'll put his username in the show notes at Mountain Josh, I think it's
Mountain Josh or Mountain Josh 87. I don't remember.
Okay. Yep. On Instagram. Yep. So we'll put that in the show notes. So if you want to book something with Josh, go right ahead. And and you work for the Pro Guiding, was it the Pro Guiding?
Pro Guide Service.
Pro Guide Service. Yep. So that's I guess another way if you wanted to just reach out to them and say that you wanted to book Josh or something like that. But anything closing or anything that I missed that you want to say or anything like that?
Yeah, let's go the philosophical route and just say be present in the mountains.
Yeah, because easier said than done, right? Type of thing.
Oh, it's hard. It's a constant practice for me. I have to constantly remind myself to do that. Yeah. But that's the most important thing. You can't relive the climbs we did yesterday. We're not guaranteed tomorrow's. So
yeah,
that's all we got.
I love it. Well, great way to end. We'll put a comma on this one because we'll be getting into some more chats soon. And that's the podcast for today. Sweet.
Cool. All right. Okay. Hey, good chatting with you, man. That was fun.
Great.